Welcome to the DFO Rundown Podcast with Frank Saravalli and Jason Gregor on dailyfaceoff.com. Delivered by DoorDash.
Welcome to episode 77, the emergency, a day early Jack Eichel edition, as a major trade happens in the National Hockey League, and we will break it all down. I'm Jason Gregor. Welcome in Frank Saravalli. Frank, this trade to Vegas is what we discussed on the pod a few weeks ago. It had to involve Alex Tuch, for there's no other way the money would work. And you said Peyton Krebs, and we said it first, and here we are. And it's basically that. Plus, they're swapping 2023 third rounders. So what do you make of this deal?
Well, it's interesting kind of how it all came together in the timing, in the pressure that was put on Buffalo by the Eichel camp to make a deal. You know, it was basically get a deal done by the end of this week or we're filing a grievance. Jack Eichel needs to move forward with his life from a medical perspective. He needs to get surgery. This is a neck condition that isn't getting any better. And the pressure was significant. And in the end, Buffalo pulls the trigger after what I'm told was a best and final offer from the Vegas Golden Knights on Wednesday afternoon. And they basically just sized it up and compared it to whatever else they had on the table. I believe it was a futures only deal from the Calgary Flames. I think there were a couple other teams that had hung in the mix and kept the conversation going. And we can talk more about those teams in the St. Louis Blues and the Carolina Hurricanes in a bit. But for the Buffalo Sabres, this brings a merciful resolution to what has been a long and winding roller coaster, up and down in so many different ways, from a promising player that was a consistent producer in the league to start, getting an $80 million deal out of his entry-level contract, to becoming a player that seemed to carry around the frustrations of the fan base and the weight of an organization on his back like a piano when he was on the ice. Frustration that was apparent off the ice, that really came to a head with this medical condition and issue that was a legitimate hockey injury suffered on the ice that they couldn't find a way to work themselves out of. And so in Vegas, they get a player who's not going to help them now, but they get don't have to pry so many pieces off their roster, given that Tuch also has an injury and is out until January. So it's not like Tuch was helping this team in the moment. The one active player that they take off their roster is Peyton Krebs, who some people see around the league as a lowercase version of Ryan O'Reilly, which is really interesting in its own right, because, of course, the Sabres traded away Ryan O'Reilly and watched him win a Conn Smythe Trophy in short order in St. Louis just a few months later. And so there's a lot of interesting layers to this to break down, but I think what everyone's happy with, the Sabres, the Eichel camp, the Golden Knights, is that this is finally over. And also, I should include the NHL in that, because they were involved in this process saying, we don't know how this is going to turn out on the grievance front if it goes down this path. The Sabres seem to have the upper hand. Eichel's camp had done all this work in the background to get a lot of supporting medical opinions to help their case. No one wanted to go down this path, and which is why we end up with a deal in the overnight hours on Thursday.
And, I see a lot of people saying, anytime you trade the best player, you usually lose the trade. When I look at this and I see what Buffalo has, I really like Alex Tuch as a player. I think he is a really good complementary player. I think he's going to get more offensive opportunities in Buffalo. I won't be surprised. Maybe not this year coming off an injury, but next season, I don't be surprised if Alex Tuch breaks out. And yeah, you mentioned Peyton Krebs and his two-way ability. He is a solid young player. You mix in Dylan Cousins. They got some guys in the same age range. You're going to have Owen Power come in there on the back end. Rasmus Dahlin is definitely far from old. I don't mind this trade at all for the Buffalo Sabres. Now, it is top 10 protected, Frank, and that to me is the interesting part about it from Vegas, because you look at Vegas, and I made the joke the other day, with all their injuries, it only took 5 years, but Vegas finally looks like an expansion team right now. When you look at their talent on the ice, they can't score. They don't have a power play goal yet this season, Frank. We're coming on game 10 tonight when they take on Ottawa. And Krebs, I know, isn't an established player yet, but there's another offensive-minded player who comes out of their lineup. Vegas is, I'm not saying they're punting on this season, Frank, but they're going to be in a real band to try to even stay in the race before Jack Eichel gets healthy this season.
Yeah, but I think that's their point, is that
Yep.
once Jack Eichel does get healthy, and we can talk about the cap considerations in a moment and how they make all this work. Once he does get healthy, and once everyone else gets healthy, including Max Pacioretty and William Karlsson and all these guys that are banged up, Mark Stone, that part of the cap equation. They only need to, in their view, they only need to get in. Doesn't matter their seed. It doesn't matter whether they have home ice. Their plan is Jack Eichel is going to be on the ice sometime probably before March. We're going to be fine once we get him back. And he probably could even help with their playoff push. So that's the time frame I've heard. And my guess is Jack Eichel is under the knife by Monday, getting this surgery. This was of the utmost importance. The pressure was on, not just from the grievance perspective, but Eichel's camp wanted to give him an outside chance at making the Olympic team. There's some thought that he could be skating again within 8 weeks. The Olympics are 93, 94 days away in Beijing. Skating in 8 weeks, potentially playing in 3 months. That's sort of right, if you look at the calendar, November 4th, right on the cusp of the All-Star break in the Olympics. I still think it's a long shot, but that's the end goal that they have in mind. I can't imagine if you're the Golden Knights, you'd be thrilled with the idea of him not playing many games, if any at all, and then going right to the Olympics. But still, there was a push to get this deal done from that perspective. Now, when it comes to the Sabres and their spot, and you mentioned Tuch, he also fits the age scheme. Him and Eichel are the same age, as you pointed out. And he's also a Western New York native. So he's from Syracuse. The general Buffalo vicinity in the NHL market concerns is sort of going home, so to speak. And in addition to that, you have a player that you have cost certainty with.
Yes.
He's got 4 more years on his deal. One of the big worries for the Sabres in terms of players that they might be acquiring from a roster is that they didn't want to have to deal with convincing that player to re-sign. They didn't want to say, well, everyone knows the situation that we're in right now, but we're building for 3, 4, 5 years from now. We don't want to have to get a player with a year or 2 left and then try and make them stay and or overpay to have to do it. So Tuch has that contract and that certainty, and you get a nice futures piece in Krebs, who we talked about and is also a former first-round pick himself, 17th overall in 2018, I believe it was. So this is a fine return. Alex Tuch isn't a driver. He's not. Jack Eichel is a driver and can be. The question marks are the health. I guess my overall concern and question on this trade and transaction is this the best the Sabres could have done? Like, is the deal that they ultimately pulled the trigger on now better than what they had on the table in July? It feels like in this case, they had a gun to their head. It was like, make the trade now, or we're filing a grievance and this is going to get as ugly as it possibly could be. And no one wanted that for the reasons I laid out. So is this really the best deal, or could this have saved everyone a lot of headache, including stripping Jack Eichel of the captaincy, the circus that's surrounded your team, and the constant questions to start? Jack Eichel could have had surgery already. The team that traded for him could have gotten him back on the ice way sooner. I don't know. When you size it all up, I'm not entirely certain that this deal now is any different. It's hard to say with any certainty is any different than what was available in July.
No, and that's a very valid point. I do think the Sabres themselves felt like you don't want to let the player control everything. And whether that's right or wrong, I think there's a sense of that. Kevin Adams is a younger general manager in terms of experience. I thought that, how the Sabres, it was really difficult for them because their team has been so terrible that automatically a lot of people say, well, the management's terrible. How can I trust them? Look at the ditch they've been digging. It's just gotten deeper and deeper and deeper. And, Jack Eichel is one of the star players. And, it's funny, like Jack Eichel said a lot of the right things at the end of the season conferences, Frank, but It's not like he dominated on the ice after saying that. So now, hey, and I like Jack Eichel as a player, but I think there's a little bit of blame to go around here on all sides. And thankfully it's over. To me, it kind of looks like a divorce where I'm not even sure you can pick either side to say I like one better or the other. It's like, you know what? Clearly there was acrimony here. Clearly they needed to get separated, and they did. And
I guess
anytime you trade the best player, it's like, let's go through
it's tough, right?
Who can we even say a trade where the team traded clearly the best player and they won the trade? Can
But
you think of one?
no, it's hard to think of one. But I think what I come back to is, I guess, a more overarching organizational philosophy. Like, it's great that the Sabres dug their heels in and wanted to show Jack Eichel who's boss here, but did they end up winning because of it?
Yeah.
I mean, and it's not, it doesn't have anything to do with, allowing him to get the surgery or not. Like, I think they would have all been better off just allowing him to get the surgery and move on.
Oh yeah. Emotions ran way too high.
Like, this is going back first off to March. If he was healthy, teams would have been like, oh, we can have this guy in our lineup opening night. Let's make the deal. And I think you would have gotten way more for him. So they made a stand here, and they're like, we've given this guy every single thing he could possibly imagine. $80 million coming out of entry level, the captaincy, we made him the centerpiece of our marketing efforts and our franchise. What more does this guy want? And I think the frustration with Jack Eichel was always, you just never gave me enough help around me to turn this team even into a playoff contender, let alone a Stanley Cup contender. They were never in the conversation. So I do see it from his side, but I'm also saying, like, what good did the Sabres do themselves here by digging their heels in and saying, we'll teach you? Like, in the end, I think their trade return got shortened significantly by the fact that this surgery was still lingering over everyone's head, and the fact that there was a gun to their head today.
And the other thing I want to look at from this trade is the salary cap. And obviously in today's NHL, salary cap is huge. And Mark Stone is now on LTIR. Same with Jack Eichel. And if
Mark Stone, is he now on LTIR?
Yeah, I thought they're moving him over there because they need the cap space. Like, if they want to activate Eichel, they would be $6 million over the cap. And so I believe what's happening here, Frank, is now, because a lot of people just assume, well, this is, everybody's going to be Kucheroving. And I really don't believe that teams are going to do that, because in an 8-month season, it's extremely difficult to have somebody like that who starts on the roster and then they're off. It's much more difficult. And I really wonder, I believe, and you talked about this from the get-go, you felt backs are wonky. I believe that Mark Stone's injury is more serious than anybody in Vegas has let on. And I think that this trade, when you look at the cap implications, Frank, on how they could possibly make it work, Mark Stone being on LTIR when Jack Eichel is activated is the one that makes perfect sense. And he might stay there for the rest of the season, because otherwise they're going to have to shed a lot of salary to get both of those guys on the roster at the same time.
Yeah, and I mean, I've always been concerned about the Stone injury, just the way that he went off. The initial indication that I had in the immediate hours that followed it was, right away, the concern was Mark Stone could be done for the year. And I think they kind of kept an optimistic approach, and not saying they still don't have one, but they kept, hey, could be days, could be weeks. Like, no one knows what that is or what that means, what the actual prognosis is in terms of that back. And that injury would be one way to manage this in terms of a cap perspective. But my question is, what happens if Mark Stone does recover in like 2 months, 3 months from now is a long time away. Sure. What happens if he does recover? Then if you have Stone, Pacioretty, and Eichel all healthy, and by that point Karlsson would be, you're $6 million over the cap. I mean, it's not an easy situation to navigate. And I want to also point out that this is a similar delicate dance from the Buffalo Sabres. A frog in my throat this morning. Yeah, they got it. They're only $100,000. I think it's actually less than that over the floor when trading Jack Eichel's $10 million and only bringing back 5.6, I believe, in salary between Krebs and Tuch. So if Buffalo wants to make another trade at some point, they need to bring in essentially the same or more than what they're sending out. And if Vegas wants to activate Eichel and all these players, they're going to need to move a contract that now appears to be larger than simply trading a Riley Smith or someone where you could get a pretty decent return for. Given the fact that, if you look at historically at the trade deadline, if Nick Foligno brings you 2 first-round picks, well, then I would have to think that Riley Smith brings you more than that. But if you're 6.1 over and Smith only makes 5, this isn't an easy thing to navigate.
No. And I think I might have said Stone's on LTR. I meant Stone's on IR right now. But in order...
right now he is. I think in order for this to happen, he probably needs to be moved over.
Yes, when the trade is made official, I believe. Although Eichel's currently on IR in Buffalo, right?
You have to go on. You can't
roster.
When you're traded. You have to be on the roster.
Yes,
and they needed to have space in order. That's trade call is still pending, by the way. I just want to point that out. These things sometimes do go sideways. Not expecting it to, given what I've done calculator wise and the people I've talked to this morning, but there's still a lot of layers to this.
Yeah. But Stone will be on LTI. I don't see any other way. Talk to Hart at Puckpedia about it, and he crunches the numbers all the time, and we don't see any other way to make it happen. So it is interesting though about Buffalo, Frank, where you have a team hovering that close to the floor, yet they're competitive. Their group so far, and it's extremely early, but the Buffalo Sabres, and I really wonder if a trade like this for those players, they're just like, oh, good, we get another player right now. Jack Eichel wasn't helping them. Right? They get Peyton Krebs.
And he was never going to.
No, the Buffalo players there are just, oh, good, we welcome in, and he fits in exactly what they have. Him and Dylan Cousins played head-to-head in the WHL for a long time. They know each other.
He's hungry to compete.
Teams.
He's hungry to get more opportunity and ice time that wasn't necessarily always available to him in Vegas. And then when Tuch gets healthy in January after the shoulder surgery, that team gets even better than they are now.
So here's my question. Does this trade make Vegas a playoff team? Do you believe they make the playoffs this season?
I believed even before the trade that they were going to figure out a way to get in. I just think the Pacific is that soft that it wouldn't be that hard to squeeze into the top 3.
Okay. Because basically they're going to be battling San Jose by the looks of it, right? Edmonton looks...
Does that scare anyone?
Yeah, well, maybe not, but hey, it's funny about the San Jose Sharks. They're getting decent, not great, but obviously better goaltending they've had for the last 3 years. And it just seems like that team, Timo Meier has exploded without Patrick Kane, and there's more cohesiveness around that team. No one can doubt that around the Shark. Well, they're joking in San Jose. They're calling the Sharkakuda because of the COVID outbreak and how many young players they've had up for the last few games. They still find ways to win.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I have questions whether San Jose can continue to do it.
But look at this. How is Vegas scoring, Frank? Tell me. They can't even score a power play goal, for goodness sakes.
Well, they need more from their misfit line. That's the big thing is yes, all these guys are missing, but what is Marchessault and Smith doing? Where they need goals.
Yeah, wow. I've jokingly said,
what is I didn't get the Evgeny Dadonov transaction from the beginning, given their cap concerns. What is he doing?
Yeah.
I mean, you want to make a joke about the Sharkakuda, they're more the Silver Knights than the Golden Knights right now.
A little bit.
I mean, all the injuries they have. I think, since we're talking Pacific, we probably should just talk about the Calgary portion of this. There's lots of talk in the 24 hours leading up to this trade and a report that Matthew Tkachuk was involved in the deal. Now, we, certainly never knock someone else's reporting. This was a fluid situation, but I followed up on the report yesterday, and we don't use a lot of profanity, but I was told that rumor and or suggestion was a quote crock of shit. That was the actual explanation that I had received. And I guess when you sit back and you think about it, if you're putting Jack Eichel and Matthew Tkachuk in the same deal, I think Matthew Tkachuk is the better player, more impactful player. I should say that.
Then who?
Than Jack Eichel.
What? Seriously?
More impactful.
Oof. We'll disagree on that one. Yeah.
Okay.
No, I don't see it.
Okay. So if you're trading Matthew Tkachuk plus.
Oh yeah. I wouldn't, that trade, like I said, Frank, on my show yesterday when it came out, I said, if that was the offer, Buffalo would have sprinted like Kevin Adams, Frank.
He would have set a Guinness Book of World Records for jumping up and down.
Exactly. He would have been Usain Bolt.
Why wouldn't that deal have been done?
Yeah. Because it was too much.
That's why the report never made any sense to me. And I'd been saying consistently, Calgary likes the player in Eichel, but they didn't like the price. And I think that's the situation a lot of teams were in. And I guess we could, debate and think about the larger picture of where the Flames are at, the hot start that they're off to. But what sense also did it make to pluck one of the drivers from their team off their roster to send them to Buffalo to not get any immediate help in the meantime? Like it seemed like a deal that would have sent their season heading in the wrong direction, spiraling for a bit. So that part of it didn't really click and make sense either. And I think the approach from Calgary the entire time was that they wanted to only trade futures. Maybe some of the first round picks that they had made recently and prospects, another current first round pick, maybe another one this year. Like that's the type of deal that they were talking about, to my estimation.
Yeah. I got a text that said, quote, "Believe Daryl." Which was, because if you saw the Daryl Sutter press conference and just how he was so, well, I don't even know if he's an active player, if he's on the roster or not. And, he basically said that, he didn't think there was any truth to it. And so I was like,
and we have to take those things with a grain of salt. Someone posted yesterday that they posted the quotes from Brad Treliving the day before he traded for Lindholm. He traded Hamilton for Lindholm. And, the quote was, Hanifin. I think the quote was something like, "These things usually happen late at night when reporters get into the red wine." And then of course it ends up happening the next day. And so you kind of see the thing from Sutter and you're like, oh, is this accurate? Is it not? So I don't know. It's interesting. I can tell you that I think Calgary was in pretty much constant communication and conversation.
Yeah.
To my knowledge, I don't believe Matthew Tkachuk was ever part of the deal.
No, and that makes a lot of sense to me. It would have been interesting, though, to see Eichel in the Battle of Alberta. Tkachuk, and I've said this many times, every fan in Alberta should thank Matthew Tkachuk for reigniting the Battle of Alberta a few years ago, because it was dormant for a long time. And that was before both teams were good. Now both teams are good. It makes it even better. But if you would have thrown Jack Eichel into the mix, man, that would have been, because to me, Jack Eichel is one of the top 10 centers in the game. And that's why I like Matthew Tkachuk when his game is on.
Is he not? Is Matthew Tkachuk not a top 10 winger? I know the difference between wingers and centers.
But I'll take a top 10 center over a top 10 winger, unless it's Ovi or Patrick Kane, for the majority of the time.
Yeah, I guess my thing is, we can talk about Jack Eichel like he's healthy, but he's not.
Yeah, well, fair. But this surgery, it's funny, Frank. I've talked to two doctors, and it's interesting about some of the different opinions here. And obviously because, one doctor said, hey, and he researched this whole thing and he knows more. And he just said, well, what he didn't understand was why some people felt a hockey player wouldn't have the same success from this surgery that other athletes have. And I didn't have an answer to that. So I don't know.
The answer or the question is simply, no one's saying this won't work. They're just saying it's never been done. And it's not
just to a hockey player, but why would a hockey player be that much different?
A hockey player facing physical contact, the rigors of physical contact, checks into the boards, heads bouncing off glass in the ice. This is in his neck. It's complicated. Again, no one's saying it won't work. They're just saying we don't know that there won't be any long-term ramifications, that you get hit and there's an issue with this artificial disc that's been inserted. And the same thing is true with the fusion surgery, to be honest. There's just the same risk in terms of re-injury exists.
Exactly.
But there's just further track record and medical evidence to say this is very safe.
Yeah.
But the flip side of those two injuries, and not to go too deep into the weeds, was just that there's a high likelihood when you have the fusion surgery that you will need another one in 10 years, that you will need another one in 20 years, and your quality of life may not be as good as the artificial disc replacement, which everyone seems to think is fine, but just that everyone likes to deal in proof, in certainty as much as you can get it, and there just isn't as much with regard to this.
No, I understand all that, and I'm not downplaying the risks of surgery. I've always been the opposite on that. Any surgery, you can have something that doesn't go well. So I hope for Jack Eichel that because it's not a guarantee. Sometimes with all the advancements in technology and science today, that we just assume, oh, this guy just have surgery, it'll be way better. Well, no, because every surgery there's a small risk that something might not go the way as planned. You might have some strange reaction, and you're not the same. So there's always a risk, regardless of what it is. Now, before we move on to another topic, quickly, Frank, the Matthew Tkachuk, I've heard rumblings that, Tkachuk is maybe not long for Calgary, and the fact that his name was out there, maybe that's why, people were putting it together. But what do you make of Tkachuk and because Johnny Gaudreau's a UFA, do you see both of them in Calgary next year?
I see Matthew Tkachuk. I don't know if I see Johnny Gaudreau.
Ooh.
I mean, there has always been the sort of rumbling with both Tkachuk players, both Tkachuk boys, that they want to be in the U.S. And that hasn't really ever subsided. Brady, though, signing his massive deal in Ottawa, he gets the cake and, seemingly puts that to bed for a long while. Matthew, this last negotiation was contentious on the 3-year deal that he's on. Again, a driver, a heartbeat of the team, the guy that, as you've seen in the Battle of Alberta, that drags everyone into the fight. I don't see him going. Where's he going? I don't see them trading away that piece. I just have a hard time believing that with Johnny Gaudreau and the age that he's at, and I know he's been we did the research, and Steve Greeley had a great story on dailyfaceoff.com about breaking down his contract and where things stand and what his comps are. At 0.95 points per game, he's one of the highest point per game producing players ever to hit the market. I think it comes down to term with Gaudreau, and I don't know if Calgary's willing to pony up to pay. They're going to need to pay market value to keep him. If not, and I don't want to say overpay, if not overpay, given the fact that I believe Johnny Gaudreau's preference is also to play in the U.S. Okay. If you were to inject him with truth serum and give him that, that's where he'd rather be.
Okay. So fascinating, because of course Tkachuk's an RFA at the end of the season. Johnny is a UFA at the end of the season.
And he said all the right things, by the way. Both guys have.
Sure, yeah. Now that Eichel is moved on, is there any other name that you are hearing potentially that will get fans interested when it comes to trades, or is it going to be calm now until 2022?
There's no one that's really jumping out at me in terms of this must happen kind of thing.
Yeah, I would agree.
I think there's been a number of other young players that you're like, oh, where does this guy fit in? Is this guy getting enough ice time? If this, Steve Greeley just wrote a list of players, the change of scenery guys on Daily Faceoff that he's kept an eye on in terms of fit. Just it's way more lowercase items of concern and question. Like, what do Justin Hall is a defenseman that's been in the press box for Toronto. When Mikheyev comes back and they need to activate him, how do they make the salary work? Do they try and move Hall at $2 million? He probably seems to be a little bit overpaid on a team where every dollar counts to be in that 6-7 role. It's a lot of situations like that where you're going, that doesn't necessarily add up, but nothing super big name Eichel front burner. And man, got to tell you, I am so, and I know you have to ask and everyone else, so happy to not have to answer any more Jack Eichel questions on radio.
Dude, it was too much. It was great. One player to watch that's interesting to me is Zadorov in Calgary. Zadorov was a healthy scratch for 5 games. Then he came back. He might have played his best game in 3 years, Frank, on Tuesday. He was outstanding. And so, with Daryl Sutter and Zadorov, I think it's going to be one where he either finally gets it, because Sutter's kind of that rare old school. He you know what? He just doesn't take any gruff. He goes, I don't care how much you're making. If you're not playing how we want you to play, you're not going to play. And Zadorov should be a defenseman who should thrive in what Daryl Sutter wants from his team. And so he's a guy that I'm very interested to see. I think his arrow goes really up and he plays great, or he's somebody that can find himself in the press box for a long time. But I'll give him credit. He responded. That's one of the best games I've seen him play in a year. So I know it's only one.
Still not entirely certain why he got a raise. The Chicago Blackhawks wanted nothing to do with him.
Yeah.
He was making 3.2 last year. How does he come out and make 3.75?
I think because of it, the potential is there, Frank. There's been a lack.
But potential is great. Yeah. Everyone's so horny because he's 6'6". He's played 415 games and now has bounced around to 3 teams in 3 years. Like, at a certain point, you are what you are.
Yeah. Well, size matters, Frank, on the back. You know how it is right now. The NHL, size on the blue line. They look at the success of teams the last few seasons deep into the playoff run, and they all had big defensemen who were mobile. And you're right that Zadorov, he's played a lot of games, but there's teams that when you have certain attributes that you can't coach, those guys just get more opportunities because somebody feels like, you know what, I can connect to him. I can get him to bring out that on a regular basis. Because Zadorov's had games and stretches of a season where you're like, geez, this guy's a pretty good player. But the problem is it's too much up and then the downs are really low. So he's an interesting one to me to watch though in Calgary when you talk about, you know, a team and where they're going, because in theory, he fits exactly what you want for a playoff defenseman. Can he play that way is the question.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sold. I think a lot of teams aren't sold, or else they would have traded for him by now.
Lots of rumor talk brought to you today by ESPN Plus. ESPN Plus has become the must-have for hockey fans, especially in the United States. They're loving it. You can get access to more than 1,000 out-of-market NHL games, 75 weekly national games, plus stream thousands of live events from the best leagues and the biggest tournaments in the world, exclusive originals, the complete 30 for 30 library, premium articles, fantasy tools, and much more with ESPN Plus. Sign up right now. You don't want to miss a game. Go to espnplus.com/DFO. Quickly, Frank, to some teams, as we had Ken Holland on for Hall of Fame earlier, and it's interesting. I want to get your thoughts. When does its early end in your eyes? Like when a team's 8-1, the Edmonton Oilers have only twice in franchise history have they won 8 of their first 9 games, and this year's the second. If they beat the New York Rangers on Friday, that'd be the first time ever, with all their great glory years, that they ever won 9 of their first 10. So you look at the Oilers, and then you got on the other side, the Carolina Hurricanes are still undefeated. They could tie the NHL record for the greatest start in NHL history at 10 in a row. Which team do you like better right now?
I think I have to say Carolina. As much as I love Edmonton's power play and the star power and all those things that come with it, Freddie Anderson has been insane to start. Approaching 960 save percentage. He's been one of the best offseason pickups still early. And I think there is something to Carolina's work ethic that I think even on days that they don't have it, when Edmonton doesn't have it, they don't look good. And if their top guys aren't going, there's not a lot of other things that people on that team bring to the tables. And that's been the big knock on Edmonton for a while. That hasn't really shown its head this season. But Carolina has that Rod Brind'Amour factor, that Rod Brind'Amour effect that, I don't know, I think just makes them incredibly hard to play against.
I'll say this. I've been watching more Canes games, man. Tony DeAngelo is looking more and more comfortable on the back end for the Hurricanes. Obviously, Ethan Bear has fit in well.
Feels like a $1 million Dougie Hamilton, doesn't he?
Sick flow by Wannabe. Shout out to Ethan Bear. Do you see his flow right now? It's unbelievable.
No.
I love the long hawk hair. There's few guys that can pull it off. Obviously, I'm not one.
I did see his Ghostbusters costume for Halloween, though. That was pretty impressive.
Yeah, but the flow that he's got going right now is pretty good. And Carolina is just a deep team. And you look, they're a very well-rounded team, Frank. The only concern I have with the Hurricanes is, do they have the top end guys? And do they have a game breaker offensively? Like, I like Aho, I like their guys, but like, and I say that when I compare them. to guys like Crosby or Ovechkin or Kane or McDavid or DRAISAITL or,
Well,
do
they're
they
not
have
as
that
sexy.
guy?
No, I mean, to be fair though, when comparing these two teams in particular, no one else has McDavid. No one else
Sure.
has DRAISAITL. So yeah, they're not winning on that part of it. I don't know. I just feel like when you watch an Aho and you watch a Svechnikov, they're not putting up the same grand blow your, knock your socks off numbers. But in this case, I mean, I think they're damn talented. And I just think when you look at the overall team, they've got pieces on their back end that Edmonton doesn't. Then just, goaltending stuff aside, Edmonton can't compete with the depth on Carolina's blue line.
Yeah, that's probably fair. I look at the one.
I mean, Jacob Slavin is the top shutdown defenseman in the league.
Yeah, I'm a huge Slavin fan. And hey, Brett Pesce is underrated too. He is.
Brady Shea's this team. Then you've got your power play guy in D'Angelo. Like, they're not really missing anything. My concern with Carolina was two things. One, at the beginning of the year, you're making a wholesale change in your goaltending department. You're swapping out both guys, bringing in new guys. How does that work out? And then the overall, there are a lot of new faces. How quickly does a team gel? You inject some new personalities. How does that work? You subtract a couple, and a really big piece in Dougie Hamilton. How is his absence felt? All those things were big question marks for me. And so far, there aren't any left.
Yeah, but if I say there's one thing, Frank, that I think they might want to add, they might want to add some size on their right side. Problem is they got a lot of skill there. So that's the key for me for Carolina, but they're obviously good. And we can't even forget Florida, because Florida's right up there as well, playing great. And Leon Draisaitl became the first player since Mario Lemieux to have 20 points in the first 9 games. And I know he's won a Hart and he's won the Art Ross and he's won the Ted Lindsay, but I find it interesting how many people around the league still say they would take McKinnon and Matthews over Draisaitl. And the more I watch Leon Draisaitl, he's the guy who's out there on 5-on-3, takes a ton of key faceoffs for your team. It might sound odd, but I think he's underrated in the fact that there should be a stronger consideration for him as the second best player in the NHL right now.
I think that's totally fair. I think he gets too much criticism by virtue of just being on the same team as McDavid. It's like, well, he only has what he has because McDavid's on that team. And it's like, well, no, that if you watch, that's not the case at all.
No, it isn't. And I'm curious to see what Ken Holland does, Frank, because there's some obvious areas that they need to improve for the playoffs. And I'm curious to see what he adds, because, Ken Holland has said in the past, if he believes his team's close, he'll look to make a move. And right now, they're obviously the additions of Hyman and Foegele have really helped them as a forechecking team. They're much more dogged on the puck. They've got a little bit more experience on the back end. But to me, there's still a few glaring holes that they would like to fill between now and the trade deadline. Let's bring in Tyler Yaremchuk for another rip-roaring edition of Buy or Sell.
Yes, and once again, it is brought to you by DoorDash, proud sponsor of the Nation Network of Podcasts. Promo code RUNDOWNDD gets you 25% off and no delivery fees on your first order. Let's jump right into them. I got 5 lined up. The Calgary Flames. I don't think you sniff around a Jack Eichel trade and then just sit on your hands for a while. I'm going to say the Flames make a big move before the trade deadline. Frank, you buying or selling?
I'd buy that. Who's kidding who? There's pressure in Calgary. They've, Brad Treliving has been in the post for a long time. They have no real meaningful playoff success to speak of. And this is the year, particularly with Gaudreau being a pending UFA, as we've talked about. And given the fact that they've mostly ran this team back and the core of it back for this season, that they have to make hay in the playoffs. And the only way to do that is to give your team every chance and opportunity to get better. So I'd imagine that if the Flames are going to go down, they're going to go down swinging.
Big trade. They've got 7 really good forwards that they like. Their blue line, obviously Jacob Markstrom in goal. I'm going to sell and say that they add some depth and that the big trade of one of their guys happens in the offseason.
Fair enough. Second one, speaking of potential names that could be moved before the deadline, I love going through like Puckpedia and Cap Friendly and tinkering and playing armchair GM. The name PK Subban jumped out to me the other day. I'm going to say Subban is in a new jersey by the end of the year, and I don't mean a Devils sweater. Jason, you buying or selling?
Holy cow. Well, is he
That is one of the worst puns I've ever heard, but congratulations.
Is he, Gene Principe would love that, by the way.
Yeah.
Is he going to keep slew footing everybody? Like, is he going to be in the league by then? Like, what's going on with Subban?
How's that? How many of these do you need to see before you're like, this isn't an accident and it's an actual thing?
Like, they could call him the Slubinator right now. Like, oh my goodness, he's just slew footing everybody. But I think
that was also pretty bad.
Hey, buddy, it's good. Yeah, we're just
punning, that is a dad pun right there. Go ahead.
I will say yes, because I don't believe New Jersey's a playoff team. And, PK Subban's got a lot of experience. The challenge is going to be if cap hit, because even if New Jersey eats half of it, it's still significant. So, but I do believe that somebody will take him. And, he's a highly competitive player. The slew foot thing, well, the league will get it out of him, because the next time they got to crack down. It can't just keep finding him. It's a joke. But yes, I will buy and say that he's on a new team before the deadline.
I'm going to sell. First off, I think PK Subban's best days are way long behind him. We're talking 3 years ago. His cap hit is incredibly difficult to move. Even if you have someone eat half, it's still $4.5 million. My big prediction with PK Subban is that this is his last year playing hockey and he's on ESPN next year.
Ooh, that's a spicy one. All right. Let's keep moving on here. Frank, I know you predicted 150 plus points for McDavid at the start of the year, correct?
151.
McDavid and DRAISAITL will combine for 300 points this season. You buying or selling on that?
Selling. I mean, to get one player there, insane. To get two players on the same team, that was my brain exploding.
All right.
Yeah, we got to go back to the LA Kings of 1989, Wayne Gretzky and Bernie Nichols, when you had two teammates with 150 plus points. So it's possible.
Did you guys work in conjunction on this answer, or did you just pull that stat out of your ass?
Yeah, dude, I'm kind of a stats geek. I remember those things. Yeah, Stevie, there's not many guys who have 150 points, man.
I was gonna say I didn't even realize Bernie Nichols had a 150-point season.
Yeah, Bernie Nichols, man. The Pumper Nickel had 150 with Yzerman. And, I think the guy who people forget is Phil Esposito in the 70s had 150 points, man. Sick. Phil's maybe the most underrated offensive guy, to get off on a tangent. But I will say yes. Now, that doesn't guarantee they both get 150, but I could see like a 156, 144 type thing. Like their power play is so good right now. And that, even if the league doesn't want to call power plays across the league, I should say, on star players, I'm going to say 300 points. I will buy.
And there's a good chance to plug Jason's article that's up at Daily Faceoff about star players not getting calls. Your fourth buy or sell question. I'm going to say Jordan Binnington will be the starting goaltender for Team Canada at the Olympics. You buying or selling, Jay?
Ooh, that's a good question.
Is he going to beat anyone up at the Olympics? That's the bigger question.
Well, you know what, Frank? Can I just say, like, somebody's got to call him out here on this. Enough's enough. Like, let's find out. Like, can he really do it? Like, another goal.
Yeah, you're right. Stop the theatrics and just do it.
Yeah.
I guess that's where I'm at. It's like, I'm all for the fire, the energy, the passion, all those things. Great.
Let's see if we can bring it.
Yeah, stop dancing. Like,
yeah, do it. Mike Smith would oblige. That would be great. I think people would see it. That'd be a heavyweight tilt. But I will say right now, because, man, Carey Price is the wild card. Because even if Carey Price plays 5 games before the Olympics, so I'm going to sell. No, I'm going to say that Carey Price will still be the goalie.
I am going to sell as well. By the way, I'm still shocked that Mike Smith was not one of the 6 guys on Canada's list. I still can't believe that's a thing. I just, when I look at Team Canada and the goaltending, like, it's such a huge question mark for me overall. Like, I could see Binnington not making the team. But I guess at this point, with the way that this season has started for both Fleury and it's just been so for Kemper, the door is wide open. So I'm going to sell for the moment, but I don't want to rule it out.
Fair enough. And last one, let's give some love to our listeners in Nashville who are Predators fans. They're going to be retiring Pekka Rinne's number at the end of the year. He's got a Vezina. He's got pretty good career numbers. He went to a Cup final. Are you buying or selling on Pekka Rinne as a Hall of Famer, Frank?
I am, it's wacky. I went off on my own little mental tangent after Jay mentioned Bernie Nichols, and I looked up his numbers and I was like, holy shit, is Bernie Nichols a Hall of Famer? 475 goals, better than a point per game, 3+ 100-point seasons. Like, that's an interesting guy, although he doesn't have the all-star team and individual awards that really help get a guy in. Pekka Rinne. Sorry for that tangent. I am going to say yes.
All right.
He's got one Vezina, 2 runner-ups, and another finalist appearance. Career save percentage, .917. 369 wins. The wins are down a bit, but he also played on a team in Nashville that wasn't very good for a long time. Not that they were bad, but just never a playoff team. Yeah, I'm going to say yes.
Man, it's interesting. There's a lot of good goaltenders who aren't in the Hall of Fame now. Now, they have more wins. They don't have the save percentage, a different era. Save percentages are obviously higher now. I think Rinne is going to be in a battle. Like, you look at a guy like Curtis Joseph's not in the Hall of Fame. He's got some really good numbers, was the best guy in his team on some average teams. And so I think Pekka Rinne is probably deserving. But Frank, it seems that goaltenders have a much harder time getting into
way
the
harder
Hall
time.
of Fame.
It's actually one of the true sort of, I would say, like, injustices of the Hall of Fame is if that can be a thing, that goalies haven't been looked after as well. So
that's why I'm selling.
Yeah, we had, and that's a good reason why you should. I mean, we had Ken Holland on the other day, and he talked and raved about Chris Osgood. Like, Chris Osgood is way ahead of Pekka Rinne in wins. Another season's worth. What is Ryan Miller a Hall of Famer?
Yeah.
He won a Vezina, but doesn't have, the other runner-ups and finalists that Rinne did. Has more wins.
Medal.
Has a silver medal.
It's funny. I was just going to say, had US won in 2010, it's amazing. And it shouldn't. One goal should not make the difference. But if he had a gold medal, I think his chances go up.
Yeah.
I will say this, though. I do think for some, nationality is going to help, because they've really wanted to try to even things out a little bit. And you got Curtis Joseph, who's a Canadian. There's not a lot of American goaltenders. There's not a lot of European goaltenders in. So I would argue that Miller and Pekka Rinne might end up with a better chance.
Now, of the guys who either are active and in the late stages of their careers and or newly retired, Roberto Luongo, yes?
Yeah.
I think so. He's pretty, look at his numbers. It's hard to argue.
He's 4th all-time in wins. His numbers are unreal.
Yeah,
he's got the Vezina.
Yeah.
Got a gold medal.
Jonathan Quick?
We debated that a while ago, I think, on buy or sell. That was in one of the first buy or sells.
To me, Quick had about a short 5-year window where he was unreal.
Yeah.
And so
he won in that time too.
I know.
Won twice.
Look at his peak
He got the
years,
jewelry.
He was damn good. His statistics, with the advancements, some other stats, some people don't like his numbers as much. So I don't know if he's the guy. He might be the Curtis Joseph, although the difference is he won 2 cups, right? And whether it's right or wrong for an individual award, some people will really rank the cups in there.
Marc-Andre Fleury, though, slam dunk.
I think he's in. For sure.
I think he's first ballot.
Yeah, but if he's in, why isn't Quick in? Like, how different are their resumes? How many more rings does Fleury? I guess he has a couple more rings.
But that's the other part about Fleury, though, is the couple more rings that he won.
Yeah.
He wasn't the guy. It was Matt Murray ultimately in net for the actual wins.
Yeah.
But then he goes to Vegas and resurrects his career, wins the Vezina late.
Yeah.
He was a number 1 overall pick to start.
His career numbers, Frank, the longevity is different. If you look at the success rate of Fleury for a longer period of time, which I do think matters.
It's way better than Quick.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Interesting. The goalie part, I think there's been some serious, Curtis Joseph should have been in a long time ago.
Yeah.
Now, Barrasso.
Look how long it took Rogie Vachon.
What about Tom Barrasso?
Yeah, he's another one.
Like there's lots of goalies that you could make a long list. That's why PEKKA RINNE, when he does get in, I'm warning Nashville fans because I understand why Preds fans will want him in. But man, you got to look at the history of goaltenders. It's one of the greatest arguments in the Hockey Hall of Fame.
What about Mike Richter? He's not in either.
Yeah, there's lots of guys.
I'm just looking at Mike Richter's Vezinas. Like
you're just reading off Vezina winners and asking or saying if they should be in the Hall of Fame.
5 times he was the one of the 5 best goalies in the league. Like over a 12-year career, that has to mean something.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, that will put an end on a tangent-filled edition of Buy or Sell presented by DoorDash.
It's Hall of Fame time. We could talk Hall of Fame stuff forever.
Oh, buddy, it's a great conversation. But the goaltending one, and I know the goalie union right now, I could just see them all. They're just screaming right now, yeah, you guys are right, because they feel like they've been disrespected for a long time. And you mentioned Fleury, and then you mentioned Luongo, and you mentioned all those guys, and you're like, man, PEKKA RINNE is a really good goalie too, but he doesn't have a resume that's clearly heads above some of those other guys, and they're not in either.
Well, I was gonna say what really sticks out to me, and I didn't want to be negative, is just that when push really came to shove for PEKKA RINNE, and I think back to that cup final that the Preds were in, God, he was awful.
Yeah.
That leaves a lingering taste in your mouth. When you're pulled twice in that series, I don't know if it was 3 times, it was definitely twice. Ugh.
Yeah, it's a tough one. That can be tough. And it's funny because when you think about a whole career and then you have 1 or 2 bad games and those ones.
I know, and that's not what defines a Hall of Fame. But if he had the cup, then all of a sudden you're going, well, that's a little bit of a different story. It feels like he's in.
Mm-hmm. And or if he would have stood on his head and they still lost, right? That can be different too, right? Because Luongo doesn't have a cup, but he's got some really good numbers for multiple seasons. So it's a fascinating conversation when it comes to goaltenders around the league. And Frank, one last one for you. I don't want to end on a downer note, but the Katie Strang had the comments earlier this week. It sounds like there's another investigation coming in regarding to Jared Scully's wife, and then Bill Guerin. What do you make of this, and how concerned should the NHL be about this one?
I mean, the level of concern is always high whenever the topic is this. And I think especially with the light that's been shined on the sport this week, it deserves a full and unfettered investigation. I think where this one feels different is really the statement that the Penguins put out in sort of full-throated defense of themselves. Not to say that the Blackhawks didn't try and say that the case with Brad Aldrich was meritless. This feels different in that it's pretty clear, at least according to court papers, that when the Penguins were finally informed of this, they made a swift and immediate reaction and fired Clark Donatelli in this case. I think it's 4 days after the first moment that they learned about it.
Okay.
So there's parts of the case that certainly aren't a good look. But when the team reacts immediately, I think that it makes it feel different. And I think there's also question from the team here as to why did it take so long for Jared Skalde to then bring this allegation to light. I think the last report that I read indicated that it was 7 months between the incident happening and him bringing it to light. And then between that, like I said, 4 days, and Clark Donatelli is no longer a member of the organization. The suit now has sort of evolved into something different that is built on the predication of the case, which is they're now suing the Skalde family is now suing the Penguins essentially for what becomes wrongful termination. They're saying that there was retribution here because he brought this to light, that he ended up being fired a year later. So that's, in my view, what the case is really about at the moment. And that's, more my opinion than anything. But the Penguins' response to that is, well, there was lots of other people in the minor league staff and system that were also ended up losing their jobs as part of COVID-19 and the contraction on staff. So I think that was probably a pretty common thing in minor league front offices, that people that worked for the team ended up losing their jobs in the middle of the pandemic, whereas an NHL team can float that period of time and survive it. It was a lot harder for minor league operations and franchises. So again, I'm not absolving anyone. I'm not, saying anyone is in the right or the wrong. This case just feels different. But then again, there was lots of people pouring cold water on the situation with what we now know to be Kyle Beach and Brad Aldrich, that the Blackhawks did their best to cover it up and really tried hard to do so. So I want to go in without prejudicing that information.
To me, I just hope that the NHL, what they've learned from this is to take it serious, because I felt like they didn't take it serious enough, even when they reached out as not even a year ago to Chicago, and they're, oh yeah, don't worry, nothing's going to happen from this, and then obviously exploded and blew in their face. I think you have to do due diligence. And the NHLPA, Frank, that's one other last one quickly before we go, is the NHLPA. You see all the players, and there's talk about they want an independent investigator now to look into things, because like that seems like the NHLPA, 800 of their players doesn't feel like they want independent investigations done now, because they don't trust the NHL based on how they were covering up, and slightly maybe don't even trust their own leadership.
Maybe that's the way that it should be with all things. Like why are organizations that are charged with wrongdoing the ones to initiate investigations? Like the information always ends up being, if not skewed, at least has the optics that they could have been skewed. Like one of the big takeaways for me that, again, not to dive too deep into it, the fact that Rocky and Danny Wirtz, as CEO and owner of the Chicago Blackhawks, were not interviewed as part of this investigation reeks.
Yeah.
They can say that they didn't have any knowledge. They also apparently destroyed Brad Aldrich's personnel file. It's 2010. This wasn't an employee from 1972. Where'd that information go? And at the very least, why were they not put on camera in a deposition style interview and interviewed by Jenner and Block to at least ask the question? If you want to say on the record we had no knowledge, fine. But the fact that you weren't even interviewed, I don't know why that would pass the smell test for anyone.
Yeah, it's a fair point. That's why this one to me is one where the NHL, you have to learn from your previous mistakes.
Use a third party that you have signed up that just all they do for you is investigate claims. They're neutral. They're not able to be swayed. And end of story, they produce a result.
Frank, it's been good. I'm happy that I could introduce you to the great single season of Bernie Nichols. If anything, it's always good to learn.
Honestly, like I was like 150 point season. Like then I'm like, is this guy? Dude. You got my wheels turning. Good job.
Yeah. Boom. Yeah. Pumper Nickel, man. That was quite the year. And McDavid or DRAISAITL, both of them maybe could get 150 points, which is ridiculous. Have a great weekend, Frank. Say hi to Mike McKenna here. The Daily Face-Off boys are hanging out, so be safe. Yeah. We'll talk to you on Monday.